What if everything you thought you wanted, power, wealth, success, turned out to be nothing but an empty dream? On a stormy night, a stranded woman and a small-town mechanic cross paths in the most unexpected way. She's running from a life of luxury she no longer wants. He's a man who's built walls around his heart, protecting what little he has left. Neither of them knows it yet, but this encounter will change everything. Love, trust, and second chances collide in ways neither of them saw coming. Stay with us, because this is a story you won't forget. The Montana sky had turned into a swirling mass of black clouds, thick and heavy with rain. Lightning split the horizon, illuminating the empty highway for a brief second, before plunging it back into darkness. Wind howled through the open plains, rattling the road signs and bending the tall grass along the shoulder. The storm wasn't just passing through, it was settling in, taking its time, making sure everyone knew its presence. Jake Dawson tightened his grip on the steering wheel of his old Ford F-250, eyes flicking to the rearview mirror as another flash of lightning lit up the sky behind him. The rain hammered against the windshield, wipers working furiously to keep up. He knew these roads like the back of his hand, had driven them more times than he could count. But storms like this? They made everything unpredictable. He was ready to be home, to step inside his garage, kick off his boots, and hear his daughter's laughter as she talked about her day. But then, he saw it. A motorcycle. It lay on its side just off the road, half buried in mud and slick with rain. A few feet away, a figure stood unmoving, shoulders hunched against the wind, head down like they were trying to will the machine back to life. Jake let out a slow breath. Don't stop. It's not your problem. But something about the way the person stood, the stillness, the tension, made him hesitate. With a sigh, he slowed the truck, pulled onto the shoulder, and left the engine running. He grabbed his rain jacket from the passenger seat, pulling it over his flannel shirt before stepping out into the storm. The rain hit him like cold needles, seeping into his jeans instantly. He cursed under his breath and walked toward the fallen bike. "You need some help?" he called over the wind. The figure turned. A woman. For a second, Jake was caught off guard. She wasn't some lost traveler in need of directions. She wasn't some kid who had taken a bad turn. She was something else. Tall, athletic, and wearing a black leather riding jacket that looked more expensive than any bike he'd ever worked on. Her long, dark brown hair was pulled back into a low ponytail, though the wind had freed a few strands, whipping them across her face. Her eyes, sharp and unreadable, locked onto his with a mixture of defiance and irritation. "I'm fine," she said flatly. Jake glanced at the bike. "Yeah, looks like it." She let out a slow, controlled breath, like she was trying not to roll her eyes. "I don't need help," she repeated. Jake crossed his arms. "Suit yourself." He turned like he was about to walk away, then stopped. "Bike's flooded, isn't it?" She didn't answer. "Electrical's probably shot too," he added. "You're not riding anywhere tonight." The woman exhaled through her nose, clearly annoyed. Jake sighed, running a hand through his wet hair. "Look, you can stand out here all night trying to prove a point, or you can let me take you to my garage, get out of the damn rain, and figure out your motorbike in the morning." She hesitated. For a second he thought she'd refuse again, that she'd rather freeze than accept help. But then, as if she knew she had no other choice, she nodded. Just once. "Fine." Jake didn't say anything. He just turned, heading back toward the truck. She followed, footsteps muffled by the rain. As soon as they climbed in, the space inside the cab felt too small. The scent of leather and rain filled the air. Jake kept his eyes on the road as he pulled back onto the highway, hands firm on the wheel. The storm raged around them, wind pushing against the truck, but inside, it was silent. After a few minutes, he glanced at her. "Got a name?" She hesitated, then, "Olivia." No last name. Jake smirked slightly, focusing back on the road. "All right, Olivia. Welcome to Evergreen Falls. Looks like you're stuck with us for the night." She didn't respond right away. Then, with a quiet sigh, she muttered, Guess so. The storm continued outside, hammering against the truck. But something told Jake this storm had nothing on the one sitting in his passenger seat. As the truck rumbled down the wet highway, Evergreen Falls came into view, a quiet town wrapped in the golden glow of streetlights, barely stirring in the middle of the storm. Jake could already picture the scene waiting for him, the warmth of his garage, the smell of motor oil and coffee, his daughter, Ella, probably waiting up despite knowing she should be asleep. But now there was something, or rather, someone, else added to that picture. A woman who didn't belong here. A woman who had secrets written all over her. And for reasons he didn't quite understand yet, he wasn't sure if he wanted to know them. The rain had finally slowed to a steady drizzle as Jake pulled the truck into the gravel driveway of Dawson's Auto Repair. The headlights cut through the misty night, casting long shadows over the garage's weathered sign, barely legible from years of sun and storms. Inside the cab, Olivia sat stiffly, arms still crossed, her eyes scanning the dimly lit structure ahead. It wasn't just a garage, it was something more. A place that had been built piece by piece, with care and familiarity. The kind of place that carried a history. Jake put the truck in park, then glanced at her. "End of the line," he said, nodding toward the building. She hesitated, then let out a slow breath, reaching for the door handle. The cold air hit her the second she stepped out, carrying the scent of wet pavement, motor oil, and pine. It was quiet here. No city hum, no distant sirens, just the occasional creak of the garage sign swaying in the wind. Olivia pulled her jacket tighter around herself. Jake walked ahead, unlocking the side door and flipping on the lights. The inside of the garage was exactly what she expected. Cluttered workbenches, shelves lined with tools, the faint smell of grease and coffee lingering in the air. But then, her gaze landed on something unexpected. A photo frame sitting on the work desk. It wasn't just any picture. It was of a young girl, maybe 10 years old, with messy blonde curls and a toothy grin, holding what looked like a spark plug in one hand and a wrench in the other. Jake noticed her looking. "That's Ella," he said simply, shrugging off his damp jacket. "My daughter." Olivia's brow lifted slightly. She hadn't pictured him as the fatherly type. Jake moved past her, heading toward a staircase at the back of the garage. "There's a room upstairs. It ain't much, but it's warm. Bed's made, bathrooms down the hall." She hesitated. "I don't—" Jake cut her off with a glance. "It's just for the night, Olivia. I'll check your bike in the morning." Something about the way he said her name made her chest tighten, not with warmth, but with something closer to discomfort. She wasn't used to people calling her by her first name like that. Not without a title attached, not without an agenda. After a beat, she nodded. "All right. Just for the night." Jake didn't respond. He just turned toward his workbench, already busying himself with something else, like he hadn't just offered a stranger a place to sleep. It unsettled her. She wasn't used to being someone's afterthought. The wooden steps creaked under her boots as she climbed, the small loft space coming into view. A simple twin bed, a worn armchair, a window overlooking the darkened street below. It wasn't luxury, not even close, but it was comfortable. She dropped her bag on the floor, running a hand through her damp hair. Silence. For the first time in a long time, there was no city noise, no buzzing phone, no boardroom pressure hanging over her head. Just the sound of rain, tapping gently against the glass. She should have felt relieved. Instead, she felt restless. Jake stood at his workbench, rubbing a hand down his face. He hadn't planned on bringing a stranger home tonight, especially not someone like her. There was something about Olivia Carter. She wasn't just a biker caught in a storm. She carried herself like someone used to being in control, someone who wasn't used to taking orders. And yet, here she was, in his garage, out of her element and trying not to show it. He didn't like questions, didn't ask them, but damn if he wasn't curious. Jake was already up by the time the sun began to creep over Evergreen Falls, the sky painted in hues of gold and blue. He was in the garage, sleeves rolled up, hands deep in the wiring of Olivia's Harley, when he heard the creak of the loft stairs behind him. He didn't turn, just kept working. "Morning," he said. A pause. Then, "Morning." He glanced up. Olivia stood at the bottom of the steps, arms crossed, hair slightly tousled, the stiffness in her posture still intact. But her eyes, they were different in the daylight. Less guarded, more tired. "Coffee's in the pot," Jake said, nodding toward the corner. She hesitated, then walked over, pouring herself a cup. Before she could take a sip, a new voice cut through the garage. "Who's she?" Jake turned. Ella Dawson, standing in the doorway, backpack slung over one shoulder, curls still messy from sleep. Her eyes were locked onto Olivia, curious, but also wary. "Morning, kiddo," Jake said, tossing a rag onto the workbench. "This is Olivia. She had some trouble with her bike last night." Ella's expression didn't change. She was still watching Olivia like she was trying to decide if she was dangerous or just weird. Olivia smirked. "You always interrogate strangers first thing in the morning?" Ella didn't blink. "Only the ones that show up out of nowhere." Jake sighed, shaking his head. "She's got a thing for asking questions." Olivia took a sip of coffee. "Smart kid." Ella narrowed her eyes. "You don't look like a biker." That made Jake chuckle. Olivia arched a brow. "And what exactly does a biker look like?" Ella consideró eso. Luego se encogió de hombros. "Not like you." For the first time since she arrived, Olivia smiled. It was small, but real. "I'll take that as a compliment." Ella studied her for another second, then turned to Jake. "Can we go to Maggie's for breakfast?" Jake wiped his hands on a towel. "Yeah, let me finish up here." Ella nodded, then glanced back at Olivia. "You coming?" Olivia blinked. No one had ever asked her that before, not in a way that made it sound like she actually belonged. She almost said no. But then, against every instinct she had, she heard herself say, "Yeah, I guess I am." Maggie Thompson was already at work, flipping pancakes and pouring coffee in her little diner off Main Street. At 52, she'd seen just about everything this town had to offer, but she wasn't expecting the news that hit her first thing that morning. "Did you hear?" She looked up as Bill, the local postman, slid into the booth across from the counter. "Hear what?" she asked, pouring him his usual black coffee. Bill leaned in slightly. "Jake Dawson picked up a stranger last night. A woman." Maggie arched a brow. "You don't say?" "I do say," Bill confirmed, dunking a sugar packet into his coffee. "Brought her back to his garage. She's still there this morning." Maggie smirked. "Well, well. Now that is interesting." She wiped her hands on her apron, already making plans. She'd be getting some answers soon enough. As the afternoon wore on, Olivia couldn't shake the uneasy feeling that being in this town, being around these people, was making her feel things she wasn't supposed to. She didn't belong here. She was Olivia Carter, CEO of Carter Enterprises, one of the most powerful women in New York. And yet, as she sat in Jake Dawson's garage, drinking coffee she didn't make, wearing borrowed flannel because her jacket was still soaked, she couldn't help but wonder, what would it be like to stay? The morning sun spilled through the garage's front windows, casting long golden streaks across the concrete floor. Outside, the crisp mountain air carried the scent of pine and damp earth, a stark contrast to the gasoline and motor oil lingering inside. Olivia Carter stood near the garage's open door, arms crossed, her fingers drumming impatiently against her leather jacket. She was ready to leave. She had spent years moving fast, from meeting to meeting, from country to country, never staying in one place longer than necessary. The idea of being stuck in some tiny Montana town made her skin crawl. She turned to Jake, who was kneeling next to her Harley, inspecting the engine with that same unreadable expression he always wore. "Well?" she asked. Jake exhaled through his nose, wiping his hands on a rag before standing. "It's not just the ignition coil. Looks like your fuel pump's failing too." Olivia's jaw clenched. "Fix it." Jake lifted a brow. "That's the plan. But I don't have a replacement pump here." A pause. Then, a slow sinking feeling settled in her stomach. Meaning? Meaning, Jake said, tucking the rag into his back pocket. I have to order it, and it won't get here until tomorrow. Olivia stiffened. That's not an option. Jake let out a short, humorless chuckle. Well, unless you plan on hitchhiking to the next town, I'd say it is. Her teeth ground together. She hated this. Hated being in a position where she had to depend on someone else, especially someone like him. Jake, on the other hand, didn't seem fazed by her frustration. If anything, he looked mildly amused. I can pay you extra to expedite it, she tried. Jake shook his head. Not how it works out here. Parts take time. Olivia inhaled sharply through her nose. Of course they did. She wasn't used to waiting. In her world, money solved problems. In this world, patience did. Fine, she muttered. Just get it done as soon as possible. Jake smirked. Was already planning on it. Inside the garage's small kitchenette, Olivia stared at the coffee machine like it was a foreign object. She'd had 1,000 cups of coffee in her lifetime, some brewed by personal chefs, others by high-end baristas in Manhattan's finest cafes. But she had never once made her own. Ella sat at the table, chin resting on her hands, watching Olivia struggle with obvious amusement. You don't know how to make coffee? The girl finally asked, wide-eyed. Olivia sighed, pressing buttons at random. I know how. I just don't usually do it myself. Ella let out a giggle. That's so weird. Jake walked in just in time to hear that, leaning against the counter with a smirk. She's got a point. Olivia shot him a sharp look. You want to make it for me? Or you just here to gawk? Jake shrugged. Could, but I'm kinda enjoying the show. Olivia exhaled slowly, fighting the urge to throw something at him. This was ridiculous. After another minute of trial and error, Jake finally sighed and stepped forward. Move. She crossed her arms, stepping aside as he poured the coffee like it was the simplest thing in the world. You're welcome, he said, handing her a steaming mug. She took it, glaring over the rim. I didn't say thank you. Jake smirked. Didn't have to. Ella Sanrio. She liked this. The back and forth. Olivia. Wasn't sure how she felt later that morning, as Olivia leaned against the garage's workbench, watching Jake tighten a bolt on her bike. He spoke without looking up. You running from something? The question was so casual, so offhand, that for a second, she thought she'd imagined it. Her body tensed. What? Jake finally met her eyes, his expression unreadable. People don't just end up on a back road in the middle of a storm unless they're trying to get away from something. Olivia forced a dry chuckle. Maybe I just like the open road. Jake tilted his head slightly, studying her. Yeah, and maybe I'm the damn mayor. She looked away, gripping the edge of the workbench. It's none of your business. Jake didn't argue. He just nodded once. Fair enough. But the way he said it, the way he looked at her, made her stomach twist. Because for the first time in a long time, someone saw through the walls she had built. And she didn't like it. Not one bit. The morning air was crisp, carrying the scent of damp earth and pine. Evergreen Falls had shaken off the storm, but the town was far from still. Word had already spread. Jake Dawson had taken in a stranger. And in a place like this, that never went unnoticed. At Maggie's diner, the clatter of plates and the hum of morning chatter filled the air as locals filtered in, grabbing their usual coffee and breakfast specials. But one man in particular wasn't just here for the eggs and toast. David Reynolds, 45. Former city reporter turned small-town investigator. He had a nose for stories, and a gut instinct that rarely steered him wrong. He sat at the counter, stirring his coffee slowly, eyes locked on a newspaper spread open before him. The front page. A bold headline about Carter Enterprises expanding in New York. But David wasn't looking at the headline. He was staring at the photo, a sleek, polished image of Olivia Carter, CEO, billionaire, untouchable. He tapped the paper with one finger, eyes narrowing. Then, ever so slightly, he smirked. Back at Dawson's garage, Olivia couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. She sat on the steps of the loft, sipping coffee, staring at the street beyond the open garage door. It wasn't paranoia. It was experience. She had spent years under the public eye, cameras flashing, questions thrown at her like daggers. The only way to survive was control, to never let them see her sweat, to never let them get close. But here, she was slipping. Jake worked nearby, replacing the fuel pump on her Harley, his back turned to her. His movements were steady, effortless, a man completely at ease in his world. Unlike her, she needed to leave, soon. The thought settled like a weight in her stomach. She had to get out before someone put the pieces together, before someone asked too many questions, before someone... "Morning, Dawson." A voice from the garage entrance made Olivia freeze. Jake straightened, wiping grease from his hands before turning toward the door. David Reynolds. Standing there in his usual button-down and a press pass that might as well have been a badge, smiling like a man who already knew the answer to the question he hadn't asked yet. Jake nodded. "David?" David's gaze flicked past him, right to Olivia. "And you must be our mystery guest." Olivia set her coffee down carefully. "I don't think we've met." David stepped inside, easy and casual. "Not officially," he said. "But you know how it is in a town like this? Word gets around." Jake leaned against the workbench, arms crossed. He didn't like this. Olivia forced a polite smile. "And what exactly have you heard?" David chuckled, tilting his head. "That you rode in during a storm. No ID, no last name, no real reason for being here." Olivia kept her expression neutral. "I didn't realize stopping for a repair required an interrogation." David smiled, but his eyes stayed sharp. "You'd be surprised what kind of people pass through small towns." Jake cleared his throat. "You here for something, David? Or just bored?" David turned slightly, still grinning. "Actually, I was just reading about Carter Enterprises this morning. Big expansion, big headlines." Olivia felt a chill run down her spine. David glanced at her. "Just a little too long." "You from New York?" he asked. Olivia shrugged. "I've been there." David hummed. "You've got that look." Jake frowned. "What look?" David smiled. "The kind that doesn't belong here." Silence. For the first time, Olivia felt exposed. Jake shifted beside her. "Well, as fun as this has been, I got work to do. Unless you're needing something fixed?" David held up his hands, stepping back. "Nope, just curious." His eyes flicked to Olivia one last time. "See you around." And with that, he was gone. Olivia exhaled slowly, rolling her shoulders, trying to shake the tension, but Jake was still watching her. "You good?" he asked. She forced a smirk. "Why wouldn't I be?" Jake studied her for a beat longer, then turned back to the bike. "You know," he said casually, tightening a bolt, "you don't talk much about yourself." Olivia took another sip of coffee. "Not much to say." Jake's hands didn't stop moving. "I find that hard to believe." Silence. Olivia could feel the walls closing in. She stood. "I think I'll take a walk." Jake didn't stop her, but as she stepped out onto the street, she knew he was still watching. And she knew she was running out of time. As Olivia walked through town, she felt the stares, felt the questions waiting beneath polite smiles. She had spent years controlling the narrative of her life. But here, she was losing control, and worse, she didn't know what to do about it. Morning came gently in Evergreen Falls. No honking taxis, no buzzing phones, no city skylines swallowing the sky, just the distant hum of birds, the rustling of trees, and the steady clink-clink of metal from below. Olivia stirred, blinking against the soft light streaming through the small window of the loft above Dawson's garage. For a moment, she forgot where she was. Then it hit her. She wasn't in New York. She pushed the blanket off, sat up, and ran a hand through her hair. The air smelled of motor oil and something warm. Coffee, maybe. It should have felt foreign, uncomfortable. But it didn't. She moved toward the window, glancing down. Outside, Jake was working on a truck, wrench in hand, his movements steady, effortless, like a man who had done this 1,000 times over. A few feet away, Ella sat on an old toolbox, swinging her legs, balancing a piece of toast in one hand and a juice box in the other. She was talking, animatedly. Jake barely looked up, but Olivia could tell he was listening, probably giving those small, quiet nods that said more than words. It was a life, a simple one, steady, not at all like hers. And for the first time, Olivia wasn't sure which one felt more real. She descended the narrow stairs into the garage, her footsteps light against the old wooden planks. Jake didn't glance up as he tightened a bolt under the truck. "Morning." Ella, however, did. She blinked at Olivia. Then, after a beat, gave her a tiny nod before taking another bite of her toast. Progress. Olivia cleared her throat. "Need a hand?" Jake paused, finally looked at her. "Depends," he said, wiping his hands on a rag. "You know how to use a wrench?" She lifted her chin. "Of course." Jake didn't argue, just smirked, tossing her one. She caught it, gripping the handle, and immediately realized she had no idea what she was doing. Jake watched, amused. "You gonna stare at it or actually use it?" Ella giggled. Olivia shot her a look. "I'm figuring it out." Jake leaned back against the workbench, arms crossed. "Uh-huh." With a sigh, Olivia crouched near the open hood of the truck. "Tell me what to do." Jake chuckled. "All right, loosen that bolt, right there." She found it, adjusted her grip, twisted. It didn't budge. Jake reached over, covering her hand with his, adjusting her grip. "Here. Leverage," he murmured. The moment stretched, too close, too unexpected. Olivia swallowed, looked up. Jake's eyes were steady, searching. "Try now," he said, voice lower. She did. The bolt turned. Jake smirked. "Not bad." Ella Sanrio. "You almost looked like you knew what you were doing." Olivia rolled her eyes, but she smiled, and it felt easy. Later that morning, Maggie appeared at the garage door, arms crossed, wearing the kind of expression that meant she wasn't taking no for an answer. "You," she pointed at Olivia. "Come on, coffee." Olivia blinked. "What?" Maggie huffed. "You're new. That means I get to interrogate you." Jake muttered, "Good luck." Olivia narrowed her eyes. "You all do this to strangers?" "Only the ones who stay more than a day," Maggie shot back. Ella giggled. "Better just go." Olivia hesitated, then sighed. "Fine." Jake smirked. "Enjoy." Maggie looped her arm through Olivia's before she could change her mind. Maggie's diner smelled like cinnamon and fresh coffee. The kind of place that had been around for decades, where the same people sat in the same booths, telling the same stories. Olivia took a seat at the counter, eyeing the plate of homemade biscuits Maggie slid toward her. She wasn't used to small-town charm, or warmth. "Relax," Maggie said, pouring her coffee. "I don't bite." Olivia exhaled. "You just ask a lot of questions." Maggie smirked. "I've earned the right." She leaned on the counter, studying Olivia. "So, you planning on staying?" Olivia hesitated. "Just until my bike's fixed." Maggie hummed. "Uh-huh." Silence settled for a moment. Then, a quiet conversation behind them caught Olivia's ear. Two men, drinking coffee, talking in low, knowing tones. Dawson could have been big. Real big. Yeah. But once Ella came along, that was it. Gave up everything. Just walked away. Damn shame. Olivia stiffened. "Jake?" She turned to Maggie. What were they talking about? Maggie followed her gaze, then sighed. "Jake used to race," she said. "Professional. Had a shot at the big leagues. But then Ella's mom left. And that was that." Olivia frowned. "So he just gave it up?" Maggie nodded. His daughter needed him more. Something unfamiliar stirred in Olivia's chest. She had everything. Money, power, a name people respected. And yet, she had nothing like that. For the first time, she wasn't sure if she'd won the right race. That evening, back at the garage, Olivia found Jake working late, sleeves rolled up, focused on something other than himself. She stood at the entrance, watching, and wondering, what kind of man gives up everything for love? And more importantly, had she ever known one before? The crisp autumn air carried the scent of warm cinnamon, roasted nuts, and sweet caramel. Evergreen Falls had come alive. Strings of golden lights crisscrossed the town square, flickering against the early evening sky. Stalls lined the streets, boasting homemade pies, handcrafted trinkets, and games that had been town traditions for years. Laughter rang through the air. Children dashed between booths, their cheeks flushed from the cool breeze. Couples strolled arm in arm, the warmth of cider cups cradled in their hands. And Olivia Carter, former Manhattan powerhouse, now an unexpected guest in a town that still didn't quite know what to make of her, found herself standing in the middle of it all. "All right, you're officially on duty," Maggie announced, shoving a clipboard into Olivia's hands. Olivia blinked. "I didn't sign up for this." Maggie smirked. "You did the second you walked into my diner." Next to her, Ella beamed. "It's true. Once Maggie gets you, there's no escape." Olivia sighed. "And what exactly am I supposed to do?" Maggie motioned toward the booth behind her. "Ring toss. Easy enough." Olivia folded her arms. "And what makes you think I know how to run a carnival game?" Jake's voice cut in smoothly from behind her. "Because I'll be teaching you." Olivia turned, and for some reason, her pulse did something completely irrational. Jake stood there, hands in his pockets, that usual steady, unreadable expression on his face. Ella susurró a gritos, "Esto va a ser divertido." Olivia gave her a look. Ella grinned and skipped off toward the candy stand. "This is ridiculous," Olivia muttered as she picked up a wooden ring, eyeing the milk bottles stacked in the distance. Jake leaned against the booth beside her. "Not ridiculous. Just requires technique." She huffed. "Oh, please. It's a game for children." Jake smirked. "And yet, you haven't made a single shot." Olivia narrowed her eyes. "I just started." "Uh-huh," Jake said, unconvinced. "Here." Before she could protest, he stepped behind her. Close. Too close. One of his hands covered hers over the ring, his fingers adjusting her grip. Olivia went very, very still. "This is about control," he murmured, voice low near her ear. "Not force." Her breath hitched. The festival sounds blurred around them. Laughter, music, distant chatter. But in this moment, there was only him. His hand guiding hers. His warmth against her back. Her pulse tripped. And she hated that she didn't pull away. "Relax," Jake said, voice quieter now. She exhaled. He steadied her arm. Then with one smooth motion, he tilted her wrist just slightly. "Now throw." She did. The ring landed perfectly around the bottle. Olivia blinked. Jake grinned. "Not bad." And then, he didn't move. Their hands were still touching. His body was still close. Their eyes met, and for the first time, neither of them looked away. "I knew it!" Jake and Olivia sprang apart. Ella stood a few feet away, arms crossed, grinning like she had just won the lottery. Jake groaned. "Kid." Ella waggled her eyebrows. "You were totally flirting." Olivia cleared her throat, straightening. "We were not." "Sure." Ella sonrió con ironía. "That's exactly what people say when they totally were." Jake rubbed a hand over his face. "Don't you have candy to eat or something?" Ella popped a caramel in her mouth. "I can multitask." Jake sighed. Olivia fought a smile. Ella watched them for another second, then shrugged. Okay, I'll go. But I see everything." She skipped away, humming under her breath. Jake shook his head. "That kid." Olivia smirked. "She's sharp." Jake glanced at her, expression unreadable. "Yeah." A pause. Then quieter. "She is." Olivia didn't ask what that meant, but something in his tone stayed with her. As the night deepened, Olivia found herself being pulled into more conversations than she expected. People smiled at her, spoke to her, included her. Not as Olivia Carter, CEO, just Olivia. For the first time in a very long time, she felt something unfamiliar settle in her chest. It wasn't loneliness. It wasn't restlessness. It was belonging. She wasn't sure what to do with that. Later that night, as the festival began winding down, Olivia walked toward the garage. Jake was already there, leaning against the workbench, watching her. "You have fun?" he asked. Olivia hesitated. Then quietly, almost like she didn't want to admit it, she said, "Yeah?" Jake's gaze held hers for a moment longer, and for the first time, she let it. The festival had come and gone, but something lingered in the crisp autumn air, something fragile, something on the verge of breaking. Olivia had started to settle in, or at least she had convinced herself she had. She had let her guard down, just a little, enough to enjoy the simplicity of the town, enough to let Jake get just a little too close, enough to pretend for a moment that she wasn't Olivia Carter, CEO of Carter Enterprises. But the past had a way of catching up, and secrets never stayed buried for long. David Reynolds wasn't a man who ignored details. As a small-town journalist, he didn't have the luxury of big breaking news. So when something or someone seemed out of place, he noticed. And Olivia Carter? She was out of place. She wasn't just another traveler passing through. She was too polished, too poised, even in borrowed jeans and a t-shirt. The way she spoke, the way she carried herself, it was practiced, controlled. So he dug, just a little. And when he found her name in a corporate profile for one of the biggest financial empires in the country, the story practically wrote itself. Olivia Carter, billionaire CEO, hiding out in Evergreen Falls. David didn't run straight to the press. Not yet. Instead, he went to someone who deserved to know the truth. Jake Dawson. Jake had been working late when David found him, his hands deep in the guts of an old truck. "You might want to hear this," David said, voice casual, but there was something sharp in his eyes. Jake wiped his hands on a rag. "What?" David crossed his arms. "Your little house guest? She's not just some stranded biker." Jake frowned. David pulled out his phone, tapped the screen, and turned it toward him. Jake's stomach dropped. There she was, a corporate headshot. Olivia Carter, CEO, Carter Enterprises. Jake stared at it, then at David. "You knew?" His voice was tight. David scoffed. "Of course I knew. The question is, did you?" Jake didn't answer. David let out a breath. "Look, I don't know what she's doing here. Maybe she's running from something. Maybe she's just playing around with the idea of small-town life before she goes back to her penthouse." He shrugged. "But what I do know, people like her don't stay." Jake felt something cold settle in his chest. David patted his shoulder as he walked off. "Figured you should know before you got too invested." Jake didn't move, didn't breathe. Then, without thinking, he turned and walked straight toward the garage. Olivia was in the loft when the door slammed open. She barely had time to react before Jake's voice cut through the space. "Who are you?" She froze. Jake stood at the bottom of the stairs, his jaw tight, eyes unreadable. "What?" He threw a phone onto the table, the screen still glowing, her face staring back at her real face. Not Olivia, the stranded traveler. Olivia Carter, the CEO. She swallowed. "Jake, I can explain." His laugh was sharp, bitter. "Oh, I bet you can." She took a step forward. "I wasn't hiding it." "Bullshit," he snapped. "You've been here for days. You could have said something. Instead, you played the part of, what? Some lost soul? Some biker looking for a little adventure?" Olivia's heart pounded. "It's not like that." Jake shook his head, running a hand over his face. "Then what is it like? Because from where I'm standing, it sure as hell looks like you were just passing time until you got bored." Her chest ached. "That's not fair." Jake's eyes darkened. "You don't belong here, Olivia." The words landed heavier than she expected. She opened her mouth, then closed it. Because wasn't that what she had told herself too? She had never planned to stay. But now, standing in front of Jake, watching him pull away from her, watching the trust in his eyes crumble, it felt like something inside her was breaking too. "I didn't come here to lie," she said softly. Jake exhaled sharply, shaking his head. Number, you just didn't tell the truth. It could have ended there. He could have walked out, and she could have let him. But Olivia wasn't the kind of woman who let people leave without a fight. I never pretended to be someone I wasn't, she said, voice sharper now. You assumed I was just another traveler. That's not my fault. Jake's eyes flashed. You're right. That's on me. I should have known better than to think someone like you could actually... He stopped himself, but Olivia heard it anyway. Someone like you. Someone who didn't fit. Someone who didn't stay. Her throat tightened. You think I don't care about this place? Jake's laugh was hollow. I think you like the idea of it. But this town? These people? They're not a game, Olivia. That hurt more than it should have. She clenched her fists. I wasn't playing a game. Jake studied her for a long moment. Then, voice quiet. Too quiet. He said, then prove it. She opened her mouth. No words came out. Because how? How did she prove something she was just starting to understand herself? Jake waited. Then, with one last look, he turned and walked out. And this time, she didn't stop him. The silence in the loft was deafening. Olivia stood there, staring at the empty space where Jake had been, her heart hammering against her ribs. And then, a small sniffle. She turned. Ella stood at the bottom of the stairs, tears brimming in her big brown eyes. Ella, Olivia Sussurro. The little girl wiped at her nose, but her lip wobbled. Are you leaving? The words hit harder than they should have. Olivia hesitated. Because she didn't know. Ella took a shaky breath. I thought you liked it here. I do. The words burned in Olivia's throat, but she didn't say them. Because what did it matter now? Ella shook her head, then turned and ran upstairs, slamming her door shut. And for the first time in her life, money couldn't fix this. Olivia Carter had built an empire. She had survived in a world full of ruthless people. But this was the first time she felt like she was truly losing something, and she didn't know how to stop it. That night, Olivia sat alone in the loft, staring at the ceiling. The silence stretched. Jake's words echoed in her head. Ella's tearful eyes haunted her, and for the first time, Olivia wondered if she had just made the biggest mistake of her life. The world outside was still. A soft mist clung to the trees, the early morning light struggling to break through the dense fog. The town was quiet. Too quiet. But Olivia Carter had not slept. She had spent the night staring at the ceiling of the small loft above the garage, her mind replaying every word from last night's argument with Jake, every sharp syllable, every glance that cut too deep. She had convinced herself leaving was the right choice. So why did it feel so wrong? She moved slowly, folding the few clothes she had borrowed, slipping her boots on without the usual precision. Her fingers trembled slightly, but she ignored it. It shouldn't be this hard. It was just a room, just a borrowed space in a place she never belonged. Then why did it feel like she was packing away something more? When she stepped downstairs, the garage was empty, except for the echo of a life she had just started to understand. The faint scent of coffee lingered in the air. The workbench, cluttered yet somehow organized, was exactly as Jake had left it. A forgotten wrench sat by the register, a reminder of a routine she had never been part of, but had somehow become familiar with. Her chest tightened. She had more money than she could ever spend, more power than most people could dream of. But right now, none of it felt like enough. A small, hesitant voice broke the silence. You're really leaving? She turned. Ella stood there, clutching the sleeves of her oversized hoodie, her big brown eyes filled with something Olivia wasn't ready to face. Not sadness, disappointment. Olivia swallowed hard. She crouched down so they were eye level. Yeah, kid, she said softly. I have to. Ella's lip quivered, but she lifted her chin, determined not to cry. Why? The single word cut through Olivia like a blade. Because I don't belong here. Because Jake doesn't trust me. Because I don't know how to stay. She wanted to say all of it. Instead, she reached out, resting a gentle hand on Ella's small shoulder. "I'll miss you," she admitted, her voice rougher than she intended. Ella blinked rapidly. Once, twice, before launching herself forward, wrapping her arms around Olivia in a fierce, unexpected hug. Olivia stiffened. Then, slowly, she let herself sink into it. For a moment, she allowed herself to hold on, to feel the warmth of something real. Then Ella pulled away, sniffing once before running inside without another word. And just like that, Olivia felt something inside her crack. She expected Jake to be waiting, expected him to have something to say. One last argument, one last sharp comment to send her off. But when she stepped outside, her car keys in hand, he was nowhere in sight. Her breath hitched. She knew where he was. And when she glanced toward the side of the garage, toward the shadows by the tool shed, she saw him. Jake stood there, arms crossed, watching, not moving, not coming closer, not stopping her. Her fingers clenched around the keys. "Just say something. Tell me to stay. Tell me I'm wrong." But Jake just stared. A muscle in his jaw tightened. And Olivia, for the first time in her life, looked away first. She turned the key. The engine roared to life. Jake still didn't move. So she did the only thing she could. She rode. The road stretched out before her, winding through the trees, the mist still thick as she left the town behind. She told herself she should feel relief. She had come here by accident. This was never supposed to last. But as Evergreen Falls disappeared in her rearview mirror, Olivia felt something she hadn't expected. Not freedom, not relief. Emptiness. She didn't look back, because deep down, she knew, if she did, she might not be able to keep riding. The plane touched down at JFK Airport with a smooth, practiced ease. Outside, the city pulsed with life, horns blaring, taxis weaving, people moving like they were all racing against time. New York had always been her world. Fast, unforgiving, ruthlessly efficient. And yet, as Olivia Carter stepped off the plane, heels clicking against the polished floor, something felt off. She had come back to everything she had built. So why did it feel like she had left something more important behind? The elevator glided silently to the top floor of a luxury high-rise in Manhattan. With a soft chime, the doors opened, revealing a penthouse that should have felt like home. It didn't. The space was sleek, immaculate. A stunning view of the city skyline stretched before her, glowing under the late evening light. But for the first time, Olivia noticed the silence. Not peaceful. Empty. She set her keys down on the marble counter, their metallic clang unnervingly loud in the stillness. She had spent years chasing this. Success, independence, power. So why did this place, with its glass walls and designer furniture, feel colder than a small garage in Evergreen Falls? She exhaled sharply, pushing the thought aside. It was just exhaustion, just jet lag. She wasn't used to all the noise again. That's all it was. Right? The next morning, Olivia walked into Carter Enterprises, her family's financial empire, just like she always had. Sharp, composed, in control. Her assistant, Charlotte, greeted her with a relieved smile. "Welcome back, Miss Carter. Your meeting with the board is in 5 minutes." Of course it was. No time to breathe. No time to process. She barely nodded before stepping into the boardroom. A long glass table stretched across the center, lined with executives who had spent years watching her every move. And at the head of it all, Benjamin Carter, her brother, 50 years old, ruthless, calculating, always in control. He leaned back in his chair, fingers steepled as he regarded her with that familiar, unreadable expression. "Olivia," he said smoothly, "had a nice little vacation?" She didn't answer. He smirked. "You done playing around? Ready to get back to work?" The words hit her harder than they should have. A month ago, she would have fired back without hesitation. Instead, she hesitated, just for a second. And in that second, she realized something terrifying. She didn't know if she was ready to be here. Not anymore. After the meeting, Olivia retreated to her office. The space was exactly as she had left it. Pristine, modern, every document stacked neatly, every detail carefully arranged. She sat down, her hands resting on the smooth mahogany desk. This desk had once felt like power. Now, it just felt like a cage. She should have felt relief. Instead, all she felt was restless, like she was suffocating under the weight of something she couldn't name. Her phone buzzed, an email, a deal worth millions, a contract she had been working on for months. A year ago, she would have jumped on it. Now, she just stared at the screen, because for the first time, she wasn't sure if this was the life she wanted anymore. The champagne sparkled under the golden glow of the chandeliers. Laughter, clinking glasses, the hum of conversation, each voice carefully polished, each smile perfectly placed. Olivia Carter stood in the center of it all, draped in elegance, surrounded by wealth, yet feeling more alone than she ever had. This was her world. Lavish, exclusive, the kind of gathering where everyone spoke in rehearsed lines, where every handshake was a silent negotiation. And yet, as she took a sip of her drink, all she could think was, none of these people know me. None of them would ever care beyond what she could offer. Olivia, a familiar voice. She turned just as Richard Hale stepped into view, smiling, confident, the embodiment of success. A high-powered investor. An old flame, though the fire had never truly burned. He had pursued her once. Lavish dates, expensive gifts, whispered promises of a life where they could rule the financial world together. Back then, she had considered it. Now, she felt nothing. "Richard," she greeted, voice smooth but detached. He studied her with a smirk, holding up a glass of bourbon. "Haven't seen you in a while. I was beginning to think New York had lost its queen." She forced a polite smile. "Just needed some time away." "Time away," he repeated, amused. "Is that what we're calling it? I heard you disappeared into the middle of nowhere. Some little town? What was it called again?" Her fingers tightened around the stem of her glass. "Evergreen Falls." Richard chuckled. "Right. Must have been a hell of an experience. But you're back now, where you belong." "Where you belong." The words clawed at her. She glanced around the ballroom, at the men in tailored suits discussing mergers, at the women in designer gowns flashing diamond-studded smiles. This was supposed to be her place. So why did it feel like she was a stranger here? She excused herself. The air inside was too thick, too perfumed, too suffocating. Stepping through the glass doors, she found herself alone on the balcony. The city stretched before her, endless lights blinking like artificial stars. Cars weaved through the streets below, people moving at a relentless pace, always chasing something. She pulled out her phone. Without thinking, her fingers moved, scrolling past business emails, past unread messages from her assistant. Then she found it. A photo. Ella. The little girl grinning, dimples showing, standing beside Jake in the garage. Her heart clenched. She hadn't taken this picture. It had been sent to her the day she left. She had ignored it then. Now she couldn't look away. Ella standing on a wooden crate watching Jake work on an engine. The grease stains on his shirt, the easy smile on his face. Something about it made her chest ache. It was so simple, so real. And suddenly, everything here, everything around her, felt unbearably fake. She exhaled, staring at the skyline, her reflection faintly visible in the glass. What am I doing here? This was what she had always wanted, wasn't it? Power, prestige, the respect of men like Richard Hale. Then why did she feel like she was suffocating in a life she had built herself? Am I really happy? Her hands trembled slightly as she locked her phone. She was Olivia Carter, CEO of Carter Enterprises. She was supposed to have everything. So why was she standing on a balcony, in the middle of a life she had spent years crafting, thinking about a quiet town, a stubborn mechanic, and a little girl who had looked at her like she was more than just a name. Why do I miss Evergreen Falls so much? The answer was there, clear, unavoidable. But Olivia wasn't ready to say it out loud. Not yet. The morning sun filtered through the towering glass windows of Carter Enterprises, casting long streaks of light across the conference table. The city below moved at its usual relentless pace, fast, unyielding, demanding. Inside the boardroom, Olivia sat in her usual seat at the head of the table, a place of power, a place she had fought to claim. But today, it felt wrong. The meeting droned on. Charts, projections, financial reports. She should have been engaged, should have been leading. Instead, her thoughts were miles away. Evergreen Falls. Ella's laughter echoing in the garage. Jake's steady hands fixing an engine, his quiet presence somehow more grounding than anything she had ever known. The numbers on the screen blurred. She barely noticed when her brother's voice cut through the noise. Olivia. Her eyes snapped up, meeting Benjamin's steady gaze. She realized, too late, that the entire room was looking at her. "You haven't heard a word I said," Benjamin stated, voice calm but knowing. A heavy silence settled between them. Then, his next words hit like a blade. "You don't really want to be back, do you?" The air in the room shifted. Eyes darted between them, waiting for her answer. She opened her mouth, but nothing came out. Because the truth was, he was right. Benjamin exhaled, shaking his head slightly. "I can see it, Olivia. You've been different since you got back. Distracted. Restless." He leaned forward, voice lower now, meant only for her. "So just say it. Whatever it is you're holding back. Say it." The words echoed in her head. Her grip tightened on the armrests of her chair. She had spent her entire life fighting to be here. But was this really what she wanted anymore? Was she still the same woman who had built this empire? Or had she already changed into someone else? And then, before she could stop herself, before she could analyze or overthink, she spoke. "I'm leaving." Silence. No one moved, no one breathed. It was Benjamin who broke the tension first. He frowned, clearly thinking he misheard. "Leaving, as in stepping down." Olivia lifted her chin, voice steady despite the storm inside her. "You'll take over Carter Enterprises." A sharp inhale rippled across the table. Shock, disbelief. Even Benjamin looked momentarily stunned. "You're serious." His voice wasn't accusing. It wasn't angry. Just surprised. Olivia nodded. "Yes." The words hung heavy between them. Benjamin's fingers drummed lightly against the polished wood table. He studied her, expression unreadable. "You spent years building this," he said slowly. "You fought for every inch of respect in this room. And now, you're just going to walk away?" She swallowed, heart pounding. "I'm not just walking away," she said. "I'm choosing something different." Benjamin leaned back, exhaling deeply. A part of him, the businessman in him, was frustrated. But the brother in him? The brother understood. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, he gave a small nod. "If this is what you really want," his gaze locked onto hers, "are you absolutely sure?" A week ago, she wouldn't have been. A day ago, she might have hesitated. But right now, she had never been more sure of anything in her life. "I am." The boardroom was still deathly quiet. Olivia pushed back her chair, rising to her feet. She felt every set of eyes on her, some confused, some disappointed, some resentful, because they would never have the courage to do what she was doing. And yet, as she turned toward the door, something inside her felt lighter. For the first time in years, she wasn't weighed down by expectations, by obligations, by endless deals and negotiations. She was free. And yet, fear curled in the pit of her stomach, because stepping away from something you know, no matter how suffocating it is, will always be terrifying. but so was living a life that wasn't truly yours. The road stretched ahead, winding through towering pines, their golden leaves flickering in the crisp autumn air. Evergreen Falls had always been quiet, the kind of town where time seemed to move just a little slower. But to Olivia, it felt like she was heading straight into a storm. Not the kind with thunder and lightning, but the kind that lived inside her. She gripped the steering wheel, heart pounding as the town's familiar welcome sign came into view. She had made her choice. Now, she just had to face it. The first person to spot her was Maggie Thompson, standing outside the cafe, arms crossed, eyes sharp as ever. The older woman's gaze locked onto Olivia the second she pulled up. For a brief moment, Olivia considered driving away, but she had spent too much of her life running. So she took a breath, cut the engine, and stepped out. Maggie didn't move, didn't smile, didn't soften. Instead, her brow lifted, voice as blunt as ever. "You're back." Olivia swallowed, nodding. "I am." Maggie eyed her for a long moment, then, with a slight tilt of her head, asked the question that held far too much weight. Why? Olivia knew what she was really asking. Why now? Why after weeks of silence? Why after walking away? And for once, Olivia didn't have a polished answer. "I don't know," she admitted, voice quieter than she intended. "I just know I had to come back." Maggie's gaze narrowed slightly, but something in her eyes shifted. A knowing, a recognition, like she had seen this kind of thing before. Finally, she exhaled, shaking her head. "Humph. You always were a tough one to read." Then, with a small smirk, she gestured toward the cafe. "Coffee's inside if you need it." And just like that, Maggie had given her the smallest crack of a second chance. It wasn't much, but it was a start. Evergreen Falls wasn't big. Word traveled faster than the wind. By the time Olivia stepped out of the cafe, a few familiar faces were already eyeing her from a distance, some curious, some wary. She hadn't just left a town, she had left a place where people noticed, where trust wasn't given lightly, and leaving without a word came with consequences. She had to earn her way back in, and he was the hardest part of that. Jake Dawson, the man she hadn't seen since the day she walked away. The man who had looked at her like she was something more than just a CEO or a stranger passing through. The man she had hurt. The thought of facing him made her stomach twist. But she hadn't come back just to watch from the sidelines. She had come back to make things right. She wasn't the same woman who had left. She wasn't the same proud, guarded, stubborn Olivia Carter who had first rolled into town. That woman had thought she had everything. That woman had believed she was untouchable. But now she knew what it felt like to lose something that actually mattered. And she wouldn't make the same mistake twice. Taking a deep breath, she glanced toward the auto shop in the distance, where she knew Jake would be. Her pulse quickened. Her hands clenched at her sides. Then with one final exhale, she started walking. The auto shop looked exactly the same. The faded Dawson Auto Repair sign still hung over the entrance. The garage doors were open, and the air carried the familiar scent of oil, steel, and the crisp Montana wind. But Olivia felt different. She wasn't the same woman who had walked away weeks ago, and she wasn't the same woman who had first stumbled into this town, drenched in rain, convinced she didn't need anyone. She had changed. Now, she just had to prove it. Jake was under the hood of a truck when she stepped inside. He didn't look up, didn't stop working, didn't flinch. But Olivia knew. He had seen her. Her heart pounded as she took a slow breath, stepping closer. He finally straightened, wiping his hands on a rag, and turned toward her. His expression was unreadable, not cold, not angry, just guarded, like he had already decided he wouldn't let her hurt him again. "You're back." His voice was even, calm. She nodded. "I am." A beat of silence stretched between them. Jake tossed the rag onto his workbench. "What do you want, Olivia?" She swallowed. This was it. This was her moment to say everything she had spent weeks trying to find the words for. "I left something behind," she said softly. Jake's jaw tightened. "That so?" She took another step forward. Yes. He exhaled through his nose, shaking his head. Look, I don't know what you're looking for, but I left you, she cut in, voice trembling just slightly. I left Ella. I left something real. Finally. He looked at her. His blue eyes flickered with something she couldn't name. Pain, hope, fear. But he didn't speak, didn't move. And so, Olivia did something she had never done before. She bared her soul. I left because I was scared, she admitted. Scared of what it meant to stay. Scared of how much this place, how much you, meant to me. Jake's brows pulled together slightly, but he still didn't say anything. So she kept going. I spent my whole life believing that success was the only thing that mattered. That power, money, control, that's what made you strong. She took a breath, shaking her head. But I was wrong. Her voice dropped. You showed me that. His expression shifted, just barely. But it was enough. She stepped even closer, pulse hammering. I gave it all up, she whispered. Carter Enterprises, my seat at the table, everything I built. I walked away. Jake studied her carefully, his features unreadable. Then, after a long moment, he spoke. I don't know what you're looking for, he said slowly. But I'm not a temporary choice, Olivia. His words hit her like a punch to the chest. I know, she whispered. Jake exhaled, rubbing a hand over his jaw. I'm not looking for an escape, she interrupted, voice firm now. I'm looking for a home. Silence. Thick, heavy, unspoken words filling the space between them. For a long time, neither of them moved. But something had shifted. Something had cracked open. And Olivia knew. It was enough. For now. The night air was crisp, carrying the scent of pine and motor oil. The garage was quiet now. The hum of the day had settled, leaving only the distant sound of crickets and the occasional rustling of the wind. Jake sat on the front steps of the shop, arms resting on his knees, eyes fixed on the night sky. Olivia sat beside him, close, but not too close. Not yet. Neither of them spoke for a while, because some moments weren't meant to be rushed. I don't know what I'm supposed to say, Jake admitted finally, his voice low, rough. Olivia glanced at him. You don't have to say anything. A beat of silence. Then Jake let out a breath, shaking his head. You left. I did, she whispered. And it was the biggest mistake I've ever made. He turned to her now, his blue eyes searching. Why are you really here, Olivia? She didn't hesitate. Because I don't want to be anywhere else. The words hung between them, raw and honest. Jake studied her for a long time, long enough for her heart to hammer against her ribs, long enough for doubt to creep in. But then slowly, his expression softened. You're saying you gave up everything, just to be here? Olivia swallowed, nodding. I don't know what the future looks like, Jake. I don't have a plan, but I know one thing. She turned to fully face him, her voice steady, sure. I want to be here, with you, with Ella, if you'll have me. Jake exhaled, rubbing a hand over his face like he was trying to wrap his mind around all of this. Then he looked at her again, and for the first time since she had come back, he let his guard down. I never stopped wanting you here, he admitted. Something inside Olivia cracked open, something she hadn't realized she was still holding on to. She reached for his hand. He didn't pull away, didn't hesitate, just held on. For the longest time, they just sat there. Two people who had spent so long running from things, from their pasts, from their fears, from each other. And now, for the first time, they weren't running at all. Jake shifted slightly, turning toward her, his gaze dropping to her lips. Olivia's breath caught. Neither of them moved. And then, he kissed her. Soft at first. Tentative, like he was making sure she was real. But then, it deepened. And everything they hadn't said, everything they had felt, everything they had been afraid to admit, was there. When they finally pulled away, Olivia let out a shaky breath, resting her forehead against his. Jake smiled, a small, crooked thing that sent warmth through her chest. "You're staying, then?" he murmured. Olivia smiled back, fingers tightening around his. "I'm home." The air in Evergreen Falls carried a new kind of warmth that morning. It wasn't just the golden sunlight spilling over the mountains or the scent of pine drifting through town. It was something else, something Olivia had built with her own hands. She stood in front of the small cafe, the wooden sign still fresh with paint, the glass windows reflecting the quiet streets of the town she had once tried to leave behind. Now, it was home. Jake leaned against the doorway, arms crossed, watching her with a small smirk. "You sure you know what you're doing, city girl?" Olivia let out a slow breath, then turned to him, a grin tugging at her lips. "Nope, but that's never stopped me before." The cafe wasn't much, just a small space, warm and inviting, tucked into the heart of Evergreen Falls. But to Olivia, it meant everything. She had spent years running a billion-dollar company, making high-stakes decisions, navigating ruthless boardrooms. But somehow, learning to steam milk just right, to grind beans to the perfect texture, to pour a simple cup of coffee, felt more rewarding than anything she had ever done before. The counter was lined with fresh pastries from Maggie's bakery, the tables were made from reclaimed wood, and the walls held framed photographs of the town, capturing the essence of the place that had changed her. She had spent months preparing for this, learning the craft, pouring her heart into every detail. And now, as the doors finally opened, she felt lighter. Jake had been the one to help renovate the space, fixing the old cabinets, reinforcing the shelves, making sure the espresso machine wouldn't explode on her first day. He never said much about it, never took credit, but Olivia knew. Every time she looked around, she saw his handiwork, his way of building something steady. And then there was Ella, who had insisted on naming the cafe. "Hearth and brew," she had said proudly, hands on her hips, because, in her words, it's warm like a fireplace and you brew coffee. Duh. Olivia had laughed, but deep down, she had loved it, because this wasn't just a business. It was a home, a place where people could gather, where stories could be shared over steaming cups of coffee, where she could finally stop running. And as the first customers walked in, as the bell over the door chimed and laughter filled the space, Olivia turned to Jake, his gaze steady, his smirk softening into something else, something real. "You did it," he murmured. She smiled, fingers brushing against his for just a second. "We did it." The sound of the garage door rolling up mixed with the quiet hum of morning in Evergreen Falls. Sunlight streamed through the open shop, catching the faint swirl of steam rising from a fresh cup of coffee. Jake stood over an old Chevy, grease-streaked hands tightening a wrench, his sleeves rolled up, his focus unwavering. Just a few feet away, Olivia stood behind the counter of Hearth and Brew, pouring a perfectly balanced espresso shot. And in the middle of it all, Ella sat cross-legged on the garage floor, a box of crayons spilled around her, carefully sketching something onto a large sheet of paper. A soft smile played at Olivia's lips as she watched them. Her family. Not in the way she had once imagined, not in the way money could buy, but real. "What are you working on, Peanut?" Jake called out, wiping his hands on a rag as he glanced at his daughter. Ella sonrió sin levantar la vista, sus rizos marrones bailando. "A masterpiece." Jake chuckled, shaking his head. "That so?" "Yep." Ella stretched her arms, then held up the paper for them to see. A drawing, a house with a red roof, a little coffee shop next to a garage, a man, a woman, and a little girl holding hands in front of it. A family. Jake went still. Olivia swallowed past the lump in her throat. Ella, completamente desinformada sobre el peso que su dibujo llevaba, golpeó la página con su crayón. "See? That's Dad, that's me, and that's Olivia." Then she paused, as if realizing something. She picked up a yellow crayon and carefully wrote something at the top. Jake leaned in to read it. "My family." His breath hitched. For so long it had been just him and Ella. Just the two of them. trying to make it work, trying to keep their little world from falling apart. But now, it wasn't just the two of them anymore. Jake looked over at Olivia, his chest tightening. She didn't say anything. She just met his gaze with the kind of quiet certainty that told him she wasn't going anywhere. Olivia took a slow breath, the scent of fresh coffee grounding her. A few months ago, she had sat in a boardroom surrounded by power and wealth. And yet, she had never felt as full as she did in this moment. She had spent years chasing success, chasing security, chasing something she couldn't quite name. And all along, it had been here, in a small town, in a cluttered garage, in the laughter of a little girl, and the steady presence of a man who never asked for more than what she could give. Jake walked over, taking the coffee she had just made, his fingers brushing against hers. For a long time, neither of them spoke. They didn't have to. The weight of everything, of what they had lost, of what they had found, of what they had built, hung in the space between them. Finally, Jake smirked, breaking the silence. "You make a damn good cup of coffee." Olivia laughed, shaking her head. "You only say that because I learned from the best." "Damn right," he muttered, taking a sip. Ella let out an exaggerated sigh from the floor. "Ugh. Can you two stop staring at each other like that? It's gross." Jake let out a deep chuckle, ruffling his daughter's curls. "Get used to it, kid." Olivia's heart swelled. For the first time in forever, she wasn't lost anymore. She was home, and it was more than enough. Sometimes the life we build isn't the life we truly need. Olivia thought success meant control, power, and wealth. But in the end, it wasn't the boardrooms or the skyscrapers that gave her happiness. It was a garage, a small coffee shop, and the love of two people who saw her for who she really was. Jake spent years keeping his heart guarded, believing that love would only lead to loss. But sometimes, the right person walks into your life when you least expect it, and if you're brave enough, you let them stay. So, what about you? Have you ever walked away from something familiar to chase what truly matters? Tell us in the comments. We'd love to hear your thoughts. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell for more inspiring stories. Because sometimes the best stories aren't about where we come from, but about where we choose to go.